What's up, my renegades? Welcome back. We've got another great episode for you today, and we are super excited that you are here with us. Boy, am I glad that they taught me that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell in high school, or like how to write in cursive or do long division, because you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket at all times. See, literally, I have never needed to use any of these skills in my whole life. Yet there's something that we run into on a daily basis that we're never formally taught about. And as a result, we tend not to know a lot about it, and it can create a lot of problems in our daily life. And that subject is conflict.
Chip, I'm all jacked up on Mountain Dew. I'm gonna come at you like a spider monkey.
Like a spider monkey!
See, conflict is inevitable. It's a daily occurrence in our life, from global wars to tariffs on trade to disagreements in the office with colleagues and bosses on how to complete projects, or the worst is partners and roommates who don't know how to properly load the dishwasher. See, conflict is seen as this negative thing, something that's taboo. It's something that should be shunned or avoided. And as a result, we don't really teach about it or study it. And this ends up leaving us woefully unprepared for how to navigate it, and we end up learning about it in these passive, informal ways. It comes from trial and error, from our own experience, and the lessons born from it are not clearly identified or codified. And this leaves many of us to make it up as we go, which can lead to a lot of mistakes. So, what do you guys think about this? How much do you really know about conflict? Do you know what your primary conflict style is? What about the 5 different styles of conflict? When do we want to employ each of them, and how should we respond when they're used against us? And what does that mean about our relationships with those individuals? Well, if you're not sure about all of this, don't worry, fam. We at the Renegade Institute, we got you, and we're here to fill in these gaps. So let's dig into it. Conflict doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. We need to look at conflict in the same way that we view fire. Use conflict in productive ways. It can give us innumerable advantages. Without further ado, we're going to introduce the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument, or as I just call it, it's the 5 conflict styles matrix. Welcome to the Renegade Institute. All right, so we're going to start off with something simple. What is conflict? How do we define conflict for ourselves? And conflict is a dynamic process that occurs when 2 or more parties perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, or interference from others in achieving their objectives. See, it manifests as this tension between competing needs, values, interests, and perception. But is conflict really a bad thing? See, often we're kind of informally told that conflict is negative. It's seen as it's this violent, it's this destructive thing. It's something we should steer clear of. And as a result, most people default to strategies that tend to try to avoid conflict entirely. They try to kind of circumnavigate around it. And like, if you've ever been ghosted, you know exactly what I'm talking about. However, we as renegades, we don't really have this luxury, right? So we can't let the fears and limitations of others hold us back. Is conflict scary? Yes. Is conflict really difficult to navigate at times? Absolutely. And it can even be dangerous. But as renegades, as world breakers, as agents of positive global change, facing down conflict is going to be inevitable. In fact, it's probably something that we should be actively seeking out. And that means that we're going to need to learn the skills to navigate and thrive in these non-permissive environments. So, good news for us, though, is that conflict doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. See, conflict in and of itself, it's kind of like an inanimate object. It's neither good or bad. The outcome, the positive or negative end state, is more determined by how we choose to respond to conflict and how we engage in it on our daily basis. It's how we navigate it and what conflict strategies we decide to employ. So, renegades, I think we need to look at conflict in the same way that we view fire. See, Fire is something that, if not respected or handled correctly, it can be incredibly dangerous and destructive. It can destroy all your things. It can lead to massive disasters that wipe out entire communities. But if we study it, if we understand it, we figure it out, and we learn how to engage with it safely, it can be used for incredibly productive things. We use fire to cook our food, to warm our houses, to power our vehicles, and we can even use it to take us to the stars. So just as fire can be incredibly destructive, it also holds the power for the modernization and technology of our modern world. The very same is true of conflict. When we fully understand conflict, when we study it, when we respect it, and we use conflict in productive ways, it can give us innumerable advantages. We can use productive conflict to accelerate our personal growth and our development. It can help us discover and identify blind spots in our understandings of the world and ourselves. We can build resilience and perseverance towards hardship and doing difficult or challenging things. And we can increase our communication and empathy skills when we're engaging in this style of conflict. We can use productive conflict to enhance our relationships with others. See, this is one way that we can set and enforce healthy boundaries within our relationships. We can also use it to deepen understandings and build intimacy with the people around us. And we can use it to proactively address issues and prevent resentment and unmet needs that can come about from avoiding conflict. We can also use productive conflict to facilitate innovation and social progress. We can test and strengthen ideas, theories, and beliefs. We can challenge injustice and rebalance power structures and build stronger, more resilient communities. See, all of these positive outcomes, these are all the benefits that require conflict in order to be achieved. And if we do it correctly, it's something we are eminently capable of doing. So with this new paradigm, we can see that conflict is a natural and inevitable part of the human experience. It involves the perceptions of what people believe is happening, and it can be both destructive or constructive depending upon how successfully we navigate it. And it exists on every level of the human experience, from the societal and global to organizational, like in places that we work, to the interpersonal between roommates and partners. So, how do you navigate conflict? What kind of approaches do you take when you run into incompatibilities with your friends or colleagues? If you're like most people, you're generally going to answer something along the lines of, well, it depends. And to be completely honest, you are absolutely correct in this. There are so many different kinds of conflicts. There are so many different kinds of scenarios and factors that we need to take into consideration. Like, who is the conflict with? What is the conflict over? How important is it to us to win this specific conflict? How much power do I have in this situation to get what I'm looking for? See, all of these factors are going to contribute to which conflict style is going to be the most important for addressing the situation at hand. So, without further ado, we're going to introduce the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument, or as I just call it, it's the 5 conflict styles matrix. So, what are we looking at? As we can see, there are 5 categories in this chart, and they're arranged based off of 2 primary dimensions. We've got the avoidant, accommodating, competitive, compromise, and collaborative. On the y-axis, we have what's called the level of assertiveness, or as I kind of put it, it's your need to win the conflict. On the x-axis, we have what's called your level of cooperation, or how I word it, it's kind of like your need to maintain the relationship during and throughout the conflict. Now, depending upon these 2 conditions, this should lay the groundwork as to which conflict strategy you should employ in any given situation. Let's say the conflict is really, really important to you, right? It's something that violates your basic human needs or deeply held beliefs. And it's something that, like, you really want to win this conflict. You're going to want to employ one of the more assertive strategies towards the top of the chart. Whereas if you don't really care about the outcome as much, you generally want to switch to one of the lower strategies on the diagram where you're going to be less assertive and it's going to be less threatening to the relationship. Now, as going on from that, the same holds true for how much you value the relationship. If you want to maintain the relationship, you're going to want to favor one of the strategies on the right side of the diagram. Whereas if you don't really need to maintain the relationship, the person you're working with, you're not going to run into them again, you're never going to see them, it's kind of okay in this situation to burn the bridge, then maybe we'll use one of the strategies on the left to get what we're looking for. So for our practical application, as kind of a heads up, when I was writing out this episode, I was doing an in-depth dive on each one of the specific strategies, and it ended up being like a 3-hour-long episode, which was too much for me to do in a single episode. So I'm kind of going to break this up into each individual conflict style, and then this episode is just going to be like the brief surface-level overview of all of them, and then we're going to be doing deep dives into each individual style in their own episodes. All right, so let's dig into these 5 categories. The first one that we have in the lower left quadrant here, that's going to be our avoiding conflict style. So that's when we have low cooperation, where we don't really need to maintain the relationship with the individuals that we're in conflict with. We also have low assertiveness. Whatever the conflict is about, it's not terribly important to us. We don't really need to do anything about it.
Tell your precious princess there will be no terms. There will be no surrender.
Hi, I'm holding for General Hugs.
This is Hux. You and your friends are doomed. We will wipe your filth from the galaxy.
Okay, I'll hold.
And the communication skills needed to employ this strategy generally are going to be pretty low or even non-existent. Like, all we have to do is not engage and not talk. This is basically being ghosted. That's an avoidant conflict strategy. It's where an individual has decided for whatever reason they no longer want to engage in the relationship, so they don't need to maintain the relationship, and they don't need to win the conflict. They don't want a big fight. They don't want to be like, hey, sorry, man. And so they just use an avoidant conflict strategy where they just kind of pull back and just disappear, although that can be really, really hurtful for us on our end when it happens to us. So how much social power do we need to engage in an avoidant conflict strategy? In this one, it's going to be low. Because we don't have a need to win the conflict, we don't really need to have a strong power strategy because, again, we're just withdrawing from the conflict. And the durability of the resolution, this is where it kind of depends. Now, durability, it's kind of tricky because it depends on what the conflict is, and we're going to be hearing that a lot. If it is someone that you're never going to run into again, if it's like a situation where you don't need to maintain the relationship, the durability can be kind of high, where like you're getting ghosted, like you're not going to see that person again, or if you're ghosting, you're not going to see that person again, and like the conflict is over because it just like it ends that freaking timeline in your life. But if it is with someone that you're going to be engaging with over and over and over again, a lot of times an avoidant conflict style is just like a pause, and you're gonna need to readdress the issue at a later on time if the relationship is to continue and the issue keeps coming up.
Hello?
Hello? Yep, I'm still here.
Can he hear me?
Look, I can't hold forever. If you reach him, tell him Leia has an urgent message for him.
I believe he's tooling with you, sir.
About his mother.
But basically, we're going to ignore the conflict and do a tactical withdrawal or a tactical pause. Now, I'm going to be going in deeper into that because the avoidant conflict style kind of gets a bad rap, and I don't know that that's warranted because you can definitely use the avoidant conflict style in some really good ways as a tactical pause. But some examples of what an avoidant conflict style, like you're going out with your friends to get lunch someday and some homeless dude on the sidewalk just starts yelling at you, right? And he's like trying to stir some stuff up. Basically, you have no relationship with this individual. You don't know who they are. You don't need anything from them. You don't want to work with them. You have no need to maintain a relationship. And whatever conflict they seem to have with you, it's not important to you. You don't need to engage in it. You don't need to do anything. So we're just going to ignore that person and move on with our life. All right, so this brings us to the second conflict style, and that's going to be our accommodating conflict style. This is where we have higher cooperation, where we want to maintain the relationship. This is with someone or something that's important to us, but we have a low assertiveness. That means we don't really need to win the conflict, or we might be strategically looking at the conflict and being like, hey, this one's not as important to me. Maybe I'm going to let them win so that I can kind of store that social credit for being an agreeable person that can be utilized later for issues or conflicts that might be of more importance to you.
Here you go, babe. Did I tell you that you look amazing today? Because you do.
What are you doing, Snotlout? They're gonna win now.
She's my princess. Whatever she wants, she gets.
Communication skills needed to employ this strategy are generally pretty low. Like, basically, you're just acquiescing. You're just agreeing to whatever thing the other person or entity is suggesting. Social power needed to employ this strategy. Again, that's also going to be low. We are not trying to win this conflict, and so we don't need a strong power strategy to try and overcome this disagreement. Durability of the resolution. Again, this one is going to be kind of tricky because it depends, but it's generally medium to high. If the issue is a one-off or low importance, like, it's probably going to stick. Whereas as long as it's not a reoccurring time where you're using an accommodating strategy when you really shouldn't, and it's leading to this like long-term unmet needs on your end, if you're overly accommodating, then the durability of the resolution, it's going to create a lot of toxic feelings of resentment within you because your needs are not being met. But basically with this strategy, you're harmonizing, right? You're placing others and their needs first. And a great example of this is like you're on a first date with a hottie. You are super excited about them and like, but you love Italian food, but they really love seafood. And all of a sudden you've discovered that like your shellfish allergy, it's kind of more like a suggestion. Like it's kind of optional, right? Like maybe it ain't so bad because you really want to impress this person. And then you find out you suddenly had a love for seafood all along. See, what you're doing is you really wanted Italian, but they really wanted seafood. And so you're going to use an accommodating strategy. You're going to harmonize with them because you're trying to get those long-term relationship benefits later on. You're trying to preserve the relationship and build that social capital. So this is an extremely common conflict style that we use nearly all the time when it comes to conflicts that we're not interested in winning. All right, next comes one of our most exciting conflict styles. This is what Hollywood loves, and this is a competing or competitive conflict style. Basically, we have very low cooperation. We don't like you, we don't need to maintain the relationship, and we are willing to commit harm or violence or use aggressive actions to get what we want. This is also where you have very high assertiveness. This is where the issue is super important to you and you're going to do what it takes to win. Now, communication skills needed to employ this strategy kind of depends. So if you're choosing violence, low communication skills, like this is what global warfare looks like. This is like getting in bar fights, right? This is, if you're choosing violence, violence pretty much transcends all language. Like everyone understands it. So you don't really need a lot of good communication skills to communicate your intent. However, if you're choosing the non-violent version of this, that's going to be like litigation, that's going to be like suing people, taking people to court. That's where your communication skills are going to have to be higher because you're using non-violent means to address this issue, and you're going to need to be on your game about that. All right, social power needed to employ this strategy. This is where you're going to need a lot of social power. Because what you're doing is you are trying to overcome someone who is pushing back against you, and you are trying to dominate the situation. So the higher power strategy you have, the more resources you have at your disposal to try and overcome this conflict, and the faster you can address this issue, the better. Like in this strategy, you basically need to dominate. You need to dominate early, and you need to dominate quickly. Durability of the resolution. This is where it gets kind of tricky, and it depends on how you're measuring it. if you do it effectively, like you sue someone and you win overwhelmingly, the durability is probably gonna be pretty high. However, if you're choosing like a violent solution to solving your problem, yes, it may solve the initial conflict with a very high resolution rate where this conflict isn't gonna bubble over again because you've just decimated your opponents. However, this strategy is very toxic, right? And it often leads to a lot of second and third order consequences. Like if you're successful in employing this strategy, it can actually create other conflicts down the road that necessarily might not have come about. And as a result, this conflict strategy should really only be reserved for the most dire of situations. It generally creates more problems than it solves. It burns bridges. It destroys relationships. And like, if you're using this conflict style regularly, if this is your defaulting conflict style, you're probably kind of a jerk and you probably don't have a lot of friends. Like on the show Yellowstone. Like every conflict, immediately it's to bar fights, it's to punching people, it's to pulling out guns and threatening each other, and that creates a lot of tension and a lot of drama, which makes the show exciting. However, it's not very good for like making friends and alleviating conflict in the future. All right, and then like again, examples of this: armed conflict, warfare, litigation, legal battles in court. That's what this looks like. All right, next we're coming to the compromising conflict style. This one, I think, gets a little more credit than it should. Like all the time we're kind of taught, hey, you got to compromise, right? You got to meet people halfway. You got to create solutions that kind of work for everyone.
How much?
The Kessel Run. That's no easy spin. I'm gonna need half the take.
Ridiculous.
25%.
You're Tobias Beckett. I'm willing to do this for 40%.
25.
25% works.
This is where we have medium cooperation. Basically, we're like, I don't love you, but I don't hate you. And so like, I'm kind of gonna work with you. We kind of need to maintain the relationship, but not really. And it's also a medium level assertiveness. That's where we're like, I'd like to win, but I don't know that I can. So I'm just gonna try and get as much as I can, but we don't know the outcome. So communication skill and social power needed to employ this strategy. It's kind of a medium across the board, right? So we're not trying to win the conflict entirely. So we don't need to have the greatest level of power when we're engaging in the situation. I mean, the more you do have, the better, because again, you're trying to negotiate for an outcome. And your communication skills, the more you have, the better, but you don't necessarily have to be like a master level communicator. Now, in terms of the durability of this solution when we're using compromise, generally compromises aren't great. Like we're told that we should compromise, and I feel like we're pushed into compromises more than we should because sometimes it's framed as like a win-win. But that only really works if you anchor at the beginning that nobody's getting anything unless we come to some sort of resolution. And then it's kind of like, is the glass half full or half empty? Well, what was the state of the glass before it got to half? Was it empty and then to half, or was it full and came to half? And so this situation, depending upon how you look at it, can either be a win-win, everyone got at least some of the pie, or it can be a lose-lose because nobody's fully getting what they want. And we end up using this solution, this conflict strategy, when really we have a lack of better options. We don't have a strong enough relationship with people to employ our collaborative conflict strategy, the really good one, but we also lack the power strategy and the resources to definitively win a competitive conflict strategy. So we end up falling into this one due to a lack of better options. And so basically you end up negotiating over what's called a zero-sum game. And I'll be going deeper into that into the specific episode about this conflict strategy. But right now what it means is basically we have a pie. We have a finite amount of a resource and we're trying to distribute it among the most people and make sure everyone at least gets some of it, even though everyone wants more than what is available. Examples of how we see this in our daily life, that's going to be politics. Like, compromise is the root of democracy because you got a whole lot of people that are interested in a specific resource. There's not enough of it to go around. Should we fund education? Should we fund defense spending? Should we fund Medicare, Medicaid? All those things. So we're going to be using a compromising strategy to try and address these issues because not everyone is going to be able to get what they want. All right, next comes to our collaborating conflict strategy. This one, if you can pull it off, is the best, right? You have high cooperation. You have a high need to maintain your relationship, but you also have a high level of assertiveness. Whatever the disagreement is, it's something that is actually pretty important to you, and you're not really willing to acquiesce your needs on this situation. Now, this is also probably the most difficult conflict style to do correctly and to pull off successfully. Communication skills needed to employ this strategy. Honestly, the better communicator you are, the more empathetic you are, the better you are at navigating this conflict in a non-tumultuous way, the better. Like, you want to have as many communication skills as you can. Social power needed to employ this conflict strategy. I'm going to say it's kind of medium. So basically, when you're using a cooperative or a collaborative conflict strategy, the only prerequisite that you really need is that your partner, the person you're engaging with, is also equally as invested in maintaining the relationship as you are. Once that's established, and like if this is with a long-term intimate partner or a very close friend that you've had for a long time and they definitely are committed to the relationship, then you don't really need power outside of that because you're not trying to dominate them. You're not trying to work against them, right? You're trying to come together and overcome this problem. Durability of the resolution is going to be high. This strategy provides the most durable solutions of any of the conflict strategies that we have. And it can also really deepen trust and satisfaction with everyone involved. If you effectively employ this strategy, this collaborative strategy on a regular basis, it can actually alleviate other conflicts down the road because you're creating those strong bonds. You're creating that trust. You're creating that intimacy. And then that person or that entity that you have that strong relationship with, it's going to alleviate conflicts down the road. It's the opposite of when we're using the competitive strategy that creates all sorts of other problems as we go along. So basically, the key to this strategy is you are changing the paradigm. You are choosing to remove yourself from, hey, it's me and I'm in conflict with you. You are the obstacle to what I need. You're coming at it from the wrong position and it needs to be corrected, to, hey, it is you and me. We're going to build a team and it's going to be us versus the problem. You're basically taking the problem that is between the two of you and you're pulling it out and it's making it a team. We're going to work together to overcome this challenge. But again, we're going to go into a deeper dive on that in the follow-on episode. But basically, like bringing it back to that first example, it's you and that hottie, right? You had a great first date and you both are like, hey, we are really digging each other, but we're also really poor. And you decide, all right, we're going to come together. We're going to make a team. We're going to get into a very close relationship and we're going to open that seafood restaurant together because boy, do we love seafood. And we're going to build ourselves out of poverty by using that team together. All right. So I know that was kind of a super quick episode and we only kind of skimmed the surface on each of those conflict styles. Hopefully this is starting to kind of lay the foundation to give you a framework of like looking at conflict and being like, hey, there are a bunch of different kinds of conflict. There are a bunch of different ways that I can respond to conflict. And I want to measure where my situation is on how much I need to win versus how much I need to maintain that relationship. And so we're going to come back with these in-depth episodes really soon here. But in conclusion, we have the 5 different styles. We got our avoiding conflict style. That's where we're pulling back from the problem. We're just going to acquiesce and let them win because we have no need to maintain the relationship and no need to win. We have accommodating. That's, you're basically a harmonizer, right? You're putting others and their needs ahead of your own, and you're building that social capital. We have competing. That's, I don't like you, I don't like your friends, and I don't like your cat, and I'm going to fight you for whatever it is I want. Compromising. Hey man, there's a finite resource. There's only 8 slices of pizza there. I want all 8. You want all 8. So we're just going to split 50-50. We each get 4. We kind of get what we want. We kind of don't get what we want. But everyone got at least some of the pie, right? And then collaborating. Again, collaborating is the best generally. That's the one you would like to employ the most as you can, which is, hey, it's you and me. We're making a team and we're going to take the problem on together. But each of these styles, they're going to have their own unique strengths and weaknesses. They're going to have their own specific times in which you should use them, and then times when you definitely should not be using those styles. And we don't ever want to be overly reliant on any one strategy. We want to be using all of these strategies on a regular basis, because if we're overly dependent on one of them, it's kind of like only having one tool in our toolbox, and it's going to make us really ill prepared to deal with all the challenges that we might be facing in life. So, as a practice renegade, it's important that we study each of these styles and learn how and when to effectively employ them, how to use these different tools to address all the different situations we run into in life. We can also take it further by using this framework. This is where it gets fun, right? To diagnose which conflict styles others might be using with us. And that can kind of help us inform how we want to be responding. Like if someone's ghosting us, okay, now we know that's an avoidant conflict style. That means they don't want to maintain the relationship and they don't need to win. And so that might change how we view that situation. Or if someone's coming at us with a competitive conflict style, we need to recognize that as quickly as possible, because that means they've already decided to destroy the relationship. They are going to use everything in their power to win. And we need to quickly respond to that with the correct conflict style so that we don't get decimated. But by incorporating this framework into our daily lives, we can become expert communicators. We can recognize what challenges are happening and how to effectively respond. And we can turn conflict from this negative, destructive process that's shunned and avoided into something that can be productive. It can help us refine ourselves and our beliefs. It can help us strengthen the relationships with the people around us and build that trust and understanding with others. So hopefully this episode helps you guys along your journey and fully actualizing your potential and helps you guys leave that lasting positive impact on the world. All right, so what did you guys think? Was it helpful? Was it not? Which questions do you have about what styles? Which style do you think is your default style? And why do you think that is? And now that you know more about it, do you think that style is the default style that you want? Are you maybe overly aggressive and you use in a competitive conflict style a little too frequently? Or maybe are we a little bit of a pushover and we use an accommodating style a lot because conflict is hard and we don't like hurting other people's feelings, but it's creating this reoccurring sense of resentment and inferiority because we're never getting the things that we really need. So these are all great questions. Be a part of Renegade Institute history. Throw your thoughts and your comments down below and tell us about how a conflict that you've had in the past now makes way more sense now that you know what the different conflict styles are. All right, for our closing quote of the day, this is going to come from Adlai E. Stevenson, who said, "You can tell the size of a man by the size of the things that make him mad." Anyhow, that's all I got for you guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you so much for hanging out, and we're going to catch you again next week. Have a great one. Cheers. Or it's a conflict that is super important. Blah, blah, blah. All right, we're going to try that again. This is where there is a... all right, starting that over again. All right, we got you here at the Renegade Institute. We're going to fill in these gaps. Let's dig into it. I'm going to do that all again because that was crunchy. Ugh, crunchy? Who says crunchy? That's weird.